Why might the United States end up heading toward a major confrontation with Iran? It may sound distant at first, but if you look closely at what is happening inside Iran, the picture becomes much clearer. At present, Iran is entering a period of severe instability. Protests have erupted on a wide scale, lasting longer and turning more intense than any wave of dissent the country has seen in decades. The level of tension has led many to compare it to a kind of undeclared civil war. In many other countries, protests often involve vandalism and clashes with police, sometimes resulting in casualties, but the numbers are usually limited. In Iran, however, the reported death toll has already reached into the thousands. A shocking figure that far exceeds many previous armed conflicts in the region. The roots of this wave of anger are not hard to understand. Iran is becoming poorer at a rapid pace, and this poverty is not an abstract concept, but something people experience every day, in their meals, in their medical bills, and in prices that are spiraling beyond control. The deeper cause lies in years of sanctions, especially those tightening the screws on the economy and the energy sector. Oil has long been Iran's most important source of revenue. But one by one, buyers have been cut off, leaving the flow of foreign currency nearly dried up. When oil is choked off, other sectors are squeezed in turn, from finance and construction to consumer manufacturing. An economy heavily dependent on energy exports runs out of breath, while ordinary people bear the consequences directly. The rapid devaluation of the currency sends living standards into freefall. Savings that once provided a safety net are now worth only a fraction of their former value. High inflation makes everything more expensive, from basic food items to medicine. The irony is that even when people have money, many things cannot be bought because goods are in short supply. Hospitals lack essential drugs. Broken equipment cannot be repaired for lack of spare parts, and illnesses that should be treatable become long-term burdens. In this environment, anger accumulates day by day, and protests become an inevitable outcome. The sense of injustice deepens when Iranians look at neighboring countries in the region. They see nations with similar energy resources, but entirely different standards of living. While Iranians must scrape together every last bit for basic necessities. In many other places, money does not seem to be a pressing concern. This comparison leads many to ask, why does a country with oil and gas remain poor? And the answer, many arrive at increasingly points in one direction. Confrontation with the United States and the West has pushed Iran into isolation. From there, a new current of thinking has emerged within society. Many people begin to believe that if Iran were willing to compromise, change course, or even move closer to the United States, the economy might be rescued. At first, protest slogans focused mainly on prices, jobs, and daily living conditions. Over time, however, the demands gradually shifted toward politics. It was no longer just about economic improvement, but about changing the entire ruling system at its core. Calls for regime change and for the removal of the current leadership began to appear more frequently, showing that public resentment had crossed the threshold of ordinary endurance. Some opposition figures living abroad are mentioned as symbols of an alternative future for Iran. They paint a picture of a country reconciled with the West, normalizing relations with its neighbors, in exchange for sanctions being lifted and the economy recovering. This vision, whether accurate or not, has become a source of hope for a segment of the population that feels trapped. And when that hope is tied to the need to change the current regime, conflict becomes unavoidable. The problem is that Iran's leadership understands very well that if this movement succeeds, they would not only lose power but face far greater risks. As a result, the government's response has grown increasingly hardline. The heavy-handed crackdown drives casualties higher, but it also signals a determination to hold on to power at any cost. This, in turn, pours fuel on the fire, convincing protesters that there is no longer any way back. It is this deeply fractured internal landscape that opens up a larger question. Will the United States stay on the sidelines, In theory, allowing an adversary to weaken from within could be an advantageous scenario. In reality, the situation is far more complex. When a major country descends into chaos, opportunities arise to intervene and reshape the outcome. And that is precisely what the United States sees in Iran. Internal instability, an exhausted economy, and a divided society all combine to create a sensitive moment, one in which any external influence could alter the direction of the entire country. So what is it that could push the United States beyond merely observing from the sidelines and toward direct involvement in Iran's story? In purely theoretical terms, no matter how large a protest movement becomes, it is extremely difficult to overthrow a government that is fully equipped with armed force. Facing guns with bare hands is almost an impossible task. Reality shows that Iran's authorities are willing to use force to send a clear message that they have no intention of making concessions. Once the line has been pushed that far, the likelihood of protesters achieving victory on their own is virtually zero. This is precisely where the United States sees a potential power vacuum, a space in which external intervention could create a decisive turning point. If Washington were to act, it would have several options. One swift scenario would be direct strikes on key military facilities, crippling the government's ability to maintain control and thereby creating conditions for domestic opposition forces to rise. This approach promises fast results and avoids prolonged engagement, aligning with the decisive, forceful mindset that has guided U.S. leadership at certain moments. Another scenario involves indirect support, supplying weapons and backing to opposition groups, turning protests into an armed uprising. However, this option carries the risk of dragging the country into a prolonged and uncontrollable civil war, an outcome that would be costly and one that Washington is not always willing to accept. A second reason Iran remains an attractive target lies in strategic interests. For many years, Iran has been regarded as one of America's most significant adversaries in the Middle East. If a pro-US government were to emerge in Tehran, the regional landscape would shift profoundly. The United States would not only eliminate a major opponent, but also gain a powerful new ally, extending its influence almost across the entire region, one that is already deeply volatile. This shift would not be limited to politics alone, but would also carry major military and diplomatic consequences. It would also trigger ripple effects for other major powers. Iran has long played a crucial role in its network of relations with Russia. If Iran were weakened or were to switch sides, Russia's influence in the Middle East would be significantly reduced. Moscow would not only lose a strategic partner, but would also face the destabilization of its broader military and political alliances. At a time when Russia is already forced to concentrate its resources on other fronts, losing another pillar in the Middle East would be a serious blow. Yet the largest and most sensitive interest lies in oil and gas. Iran possesses vast energy reserves and serves as a critical supplier to many major economies. If the United States could control or strongly influence the flow of Iranian oil, the global energy balance would tilt decisively in Washington's favor. This would not only place pressure on economic rivals, but would also allow the U.S. to exert significant influence over global oil prices. When energy prices become a tool, countries that rely heavily on oil exports feel the impact directly. Another factor that makes the current moment particularly notable is Iran's relative weakening. After previous military confrontations and airstrikes, much of its military infrastructure has suffered damage. Its defensive systems are no longer operating at optimal capacity, while senior command structures have also absorbed significant losses. At the same time, Iran's key allies are preoccupied with their own challenges and are less able to provide strong support than before. This temporarily tilts the balance of power toward the United States and its allies, reducing the risks associated with a direct confrontation. In addition, the proxy forces Iran once relied on to project power across the region are no longer at their peak. Some have been severely weakened, while others have lost key figures. This reduces Iran's ability to retaliate indirectly if the United States were to strike directly. With its avenues for counterattack constrained, Washington gains greater confidence that an intervention would not spiral into a prolonged, multi-front war. Taken together, these factors create what analysts often describe as a convergence of favorable conditions. Iran is internally fractured. Public discontent is widespread. The government is economically isolated. Military strength has eroded, and allies are scattered. Within this context, the United States could frame intervention under the banner of humanitarian concern, claiming to protect civilians from repression. This justification, while controversial, may still provide the necessary political cover on the international stage. Whether action will actually be taken, however, is another matter entirely. The United States must always weigh benefits against risks. A miscalculation could ignite a wider regional conflict with unpredictable consequences. For this reason, even though conditions appear to lean toward the possibility of intervention, the final decision will depend on political calculations in Washington and the reactions of all involved parties. In the short term, the world can only wait and watch to see whether the United States continues to exercise patience or chooses to act in an effort to reshape the order in Iran and the broader Middle East.